Street Fighter EX series was a line of spin-off games developed by Eureka and published by Capcom starting back in 1996. It was the first real attempt to take one of the most iconic two-dimensional fighting games and push it into the world of 3D. Now, don't get it twisted, this was Capcom's first polygonal fighter. That honor actually goes to Star Gladiator, which dropped a few months earlier. But around this time, 3D was a new hottest thing. Games like Virtua Fighter and Tekken were still in the spotlight with their flashy visuals and cutting-edge presentation. So Eureka decided to take a swing at it, breaking the beloved cast of Street Fighter, and a few stragglers, into a fully 3D arena for the very first time. While other polygonal bashers around this time were exploring some form of 3D movement, Acura decided to keep Street Fighter EX's gameplay firmly grounded in 2 dimensions. Sure, the game brought a few new tricks to the table like guard breaks and super cancels, but underneath it all, it still played a lot like the Alpha series. The idea was simple. Let longtime fans pick up the controller and start throwing Hadoukens right away without having to relearn a whole game. The 3D visuals, those were mostly just for show. Now, not everyone was thrilled about that. Some of the more casual fans really wanted to see Ryu take a sidestep or two. But even with that bit of controversy, Eureka's decision ended up paying off. Over time, Street Fighter EX built a loyal following, one that still stands strong today. Both final versions of EX1 and EX2, Plus Alpha and Plus respectively, still see plenty of love even today. EX2 Plus especially has managed to carve out a respectable spot in the tournament scene, and that's largely thanks to Eureka sticking close to Street Fighter's classic mechanics while throwing in a few oddball choices to make the game stand on their own. But then, there's that one, the odd one out. The game that kinda came and went without much fanfare. From what I can remember, there wasn't a ton of hype behind this one, either from fans or from Capcom themselves. And honestly, it just might be one of the least talked about fighting games in Capcom's entire catalog. So let's dive into the final chapter of the EX series and figure out what went wrong. This is Team Crossbody, and this is our look at Street Fighter EX3. For those clicking on this video and for some unknown reason don't know what the EX series was, let us give you a quick rundown on a series that will both set the table for EX3 and give y'all our quick opinions on each one since they're so similar. Street Fighter EX, specifically Plus Alpha, hit the PlayStation in 1997. It was the first version of the game to be released for home consoles, and actually the third and final iteration of the original EX. Now, if you already know what Street Fighter is, there isn't much mystery here. 6 buttons, super meters, Hadoukens, Shoryukens, final atomic busters, and spinning bird kicks, they're all here and accounted for. Despite the absence of defensive options like ground recovery, mix-ups in EX1 are pretty weak. Very few fighters have overheads, cornered opponents usually can't be crossed up, and going into a feeble position and mashing crouch tech like in Street Fighter 4 is unfortunately a totally valid strategy. Without meter, blocking is way too strong. There's not much you can do on offense if the opponent decides to turtle up, outside of fishing for fame traps or going for a tick throw. But once you got meter, well, let's just say it's fitting that this video dropped in October. For one bar, every character in Street Fighter EX gains access to an advanced and unblockable attack. And if it connects, guard break stuns the opponent, letting you unload with a full max damage combo right after. EX also expands on the classic super cancel system. Normally it works just the way it does in the Alpha games. You can cancel into a super from a normal or a special move, but EX takes things a step further. It lets fighters cancel one super into another super into another super. Yeah, good sentence structuring, I know. As long as you've got the meter for it, you can chain pretty much any of your available supers. Level 3s excluded for obvious reasons. The first EX game is the most bare bones, and since I'm a basic bitch, it might be my favorite of the 3 games.
Released a year later with Street Fighter EX2, followed by its update EX2 Plus just 1 year after that. Since EX2 was developed so soon after the first game, most of the core gameplay carried over. The big new addition this time was the Excel system, and this became the defining mechanic of the sequel. It works a lot like the custom combos from Alpha 2 or the A-Groove system from Capcom vs SNK 2. Excel lets players freely cancel any normal to another normal or special move, with specials only able to cancel to other specials. The activation itself comes with invincibility, making it not just useful for combos, but for slipping through gaps, punishing, or even anti-airing. And the real kicker, it only costs 1 bar of super meter. This means you've got a super powerful mechanic that gives you access to big damage, lets you escape bad situations, and it only costs a single bar of meter. And we all know what that means. Say it with me now. Over-socializing mechanic. If you've been around our channel a while, you already know how we feel about this kind of thing. But to be fair, EX2 is a lot more balanced than EX1, but matches still tend to evolve into Excel showdowns, where one tiny mistake can lead to someone popping it and taking the other guy straight to Combo City for a few seconds. Don't get me wrong, I love EX2 just like everyone else, but once you start looking at how the game plays at a high level, it does lose a bit of its shine for me. Just an opinion, of course.
And that brings us to the meat and potatoes of the video, Street Fighter EX3 released in 2000. Now I don't remember this game getting much attention when it dropped. The only time I really saw it get any attention was from those old gaming magazine lists. Stuff like top 10 games you should never play, or however they were phrased back then. It was a different era, when a single bad review from a big outlet could completely sink a game's momentum. But to be absolutely fair, if you were a casual fighting game fan around that time, and you didn't already have an attachment to Street Fighter or the EX series, how would you feel looking at the screenshots of this game? Compared to the likes of DOA 2, Tekken Tag Tournament, Soul Calibur, or even Capcom's own Plasma Sword, all of which came out around the same time, EX3 didn't exactly turn heads. And if you were a Capcom diehard looking for something new, Rival Schools 2 was just around the corner, assuming you had a Dreamcast. The point is, there were a ton of better looking, more exciting options in the fighting game scene, both 2D and 3D, and EX3's crunchy visuals definitely weren't doing it any favors. But since we're on the topic, let's talk about how the game looks.
I'm not going to fake the funk here. EX3, while not the ugliest game I've ever seen, doesn't exactly look fantastic. Even by 2000 standards, it's pretty subpar. Another early PS2 fighter is Bloody Roar 3 that came out at the end of the same year, and it absolutely runs circles around EX3 in the visuals department. But honestly, the EX series has always struggled in that area, at least in my humble opinion. Anyone familiar with the earlier games or just paying attention will quickly notice that the character models are basically recycled from the previous entries. Sure, they've been given a bit of a PS2 facelift with more detailed textures, but the foundation is still the same. To me, some of the characters do look great, especially when it comes down to their faces, and some just look like they came straight out of the microwave on some Earthworm Jim 3D type shit. And that also extends to the animations. They're fine for what they are, but let's be real, some of them could have definitely used another pass. It's not all bad though. The backgrounds actually got a major upgrade in the jump to 64-bit, going with those stretched out RPG Maker PNGs on the turntable, which honestly I kinda like. And in their place, there are much more detailed backdrops with multiple layers of depth and a few 3D elements that make things pop just a little more. Now sure, it still looks a bit janky when the stage starts to rotate, but hey, if Tekken can get away with it, I'm not about to roast EX3 for doing the same thing. What I can bash the game for are some of those special effects, which are just flat out lackluster. I can't really stand those level 3 supers that take you to this random black void where the moves go off while a bunch of sad, blurry, multicolored fireworks pop up in the background. Like seriously, it looks rough. Crash Team Racing did the same thing during this credit scene and it looked way better. And that was on the PlayStation 1.
When it comes to the music, what even needs to be said? Anyone familiar with the EX series already knows the soundtrack is godly, and EX3 is no different. Instead of relying on the usual catchy, high-energy battle themes that loop every 30 seconds, EX3's soundtrack goes for a little something different. It leans into atmosphere, mellow jazz, and electro-fused textures that take their time to build and develop. It's definitely not your typical fighting game sound, and yeah, I get why some people think it lacks energy. That's fair. It's kinda like, yeah, we're gonna fight, but first let's aura farm for the first minute and a half. Now, not every track does that, some of them get straight to the point, and those are great too. But honestly, the slower, more layered ones are where the soundtrack really shines. And to that end, there's always talk about how great music like Gao's Street Fighter 2 theme is, but the ES games in general have some of the best music in the series. Blurry Home, Ancient Zone, Iron Eyes, Cold Man Rosso are some of the best music in the game, and that's not saying much because it's all great. Let's take a look at Sagat's theme for example. Yeah, it's not as energetic as his typical themes up to this point, but it's oddly reflective and sad. Who hurt you, Sagat? Who hurt you? Oh yeah, look, it ain't everybody's cup of tea, alright? But this is Sagat's theme for me. Either it's listening in-game or off, the entire EX soundtrack is worth listening to. You hear these tunes all throughout this channel and it won't stop anytime soon. Sorry for the tangent, but we really love the music.
Much like EX2, EX3 bring over the core systems once again, but instead of adding on to everything already there, the decision was made to drop the Excel mechanic and bring in a couple of fresh ideas to shake things up. First up is the momentary combo system. This mechanic lets you automatically cancel one special attack into another by pressing any button with precise timing. If you nail it, your character will perform the next move instantly, accompanied by a quick green flash to show that you pulled it off. Now, technically you can't use momentary combos to chain the same special move together. Although that's a bit of a fib, some characters actually gain access to unique follow-ups that only work through this system. For example, Ryu could cancel his fireball into his weird Rekka Tatsu thing, or even to another Hadouken. You could argue that it's the flame version of the move, so it's technically different, but come on, it's essentially the same move. Maybe I'm being a little short-sighted here, but I don't really see the point of this system. If it was meant to help ease new players into the game, then why make the timing window so small? Once you get the timing down, sure, it has some uses, like squeezing a bit more damage for a special cancel, but most of the time it's just getting away when I'm trying to string moves together quickly. It's especially annoying with charge characters, or the ones that use mashing inputs, since I might be setting up another charge and accidentally triggering a momentary combo instead. Even over mashing slightly can set it off, and it just kills the flow.
The rest of EX3's new features revolve around its biggest addition, the tag system. That's right, Street Fighter EX3 is a tag game of all things. Tagging is done by pressing Fierce and Roundhouse at the same time, but your partner needs to be on standby before you do so. You can tag anytime you're on the ground and not committed to a super move. You can even cancel on hit normals or specials into tags. During the startup of a tag, you're actually invincible for a short window, which actually makes it a pretty nifty defensive tool against things like meaties. While your characters are switching places, you still have limited control over the outgoing fighter until the tag fully completes. This opens the door for setups or combo extensions the incoming character can take advantage of. And for how simple it sounds, it's surprisingly robust. Along with setting up for big combos, tagging can also be used to create block strings and mix-ups. Since time freezes briefly and you retain control over that character, you can even set up things like tick throws to pull off some strange improvised combos. Because both characters manage their own individual meters, things can get pretty wacky, creating a surprisingly open system that encourages experimentation and all kinds of creative tech. The tagging here honestly feels like an early version of the active tag mechanic seen in modern team fighters, or more appropriately, a rough prototype of what Street Fighter Cross-Tekken would eventually do later. It's good stuff.
If both of your characters are still alive and you have at least 2 bars of meter, and you just have to blow it on something dumb, there's always a critical parade. This have both teammates rush in and absolutely dogpile on the opponent, with infinite super meter for about 2 or 3 seconds. I'll call it stupid, but honestly, with the right combination of characters, it could really work. Another thing you could do with your meter are meteor tag combos, which have both characters perform a flashy team up super that dishes out a good chunk of damage in exchange for their initiator's entire bar. Unlike Critical Parade though, meteor tag combos are tied down to a particular team, and even further tied to a particular character. You can only trigger them for a certain member of that pair. There aren't many of them in the game to begin with, which is a shame because the majority of them have really cool animations. Now for all these mechanics to really shine, you're going to need a partner, but if your teammate gets KO'd and you're left solo, EX3 has your back with their emotional flow. When your partner goes down, any meter they've built up during a match is transferred to your remaining fighter. This means that your last character can end up with a potential 6 levels of super gauge. It's a solid combat mechanic because it gives you power, but it doesn't hand you the win. Everything is still on your skill, and honestly, I like that.
This may actually be a controversial take, but I actually like the tag mechanics found in EX3 a lot more than Excel from EX2. It might be a little bit of an exaggeration here, but Excel is a mechanic that can completely dominate a match. EX2 is still very fun, but it's hard to make a move without accidentally triggering it then getting comboed to all hell, and sometimes it makes every match feel samey. EX3's tag system, on the other hand, is a great example of a core mechanic done right. It encourages its use, but it doesn't funnel the entire roster into one optimized playstyle. Sure, EX2 is more balanced than EX1, and probably way more balanced than EX3 too, but that's largely because Excel's centralizing power. If everyone has access to the strongest tools in the game, no one can truly be bad. EX3 by contrast has its own balancing issues, I'm sure, but at least each fighter has to rely on their own unique strengths to win. And the tag system itself is open, fun, and full of possibilities to experiment with. But hey, that's just my opinion. Madhouse definitely disagrees with me on this.
So what exactly went wrong with Street Fighter EX3? Why did this game get shoved into the bargain bin of history while its predecessors, especially EX2 Plus, still gets a little love from the community? Well, it wasn't just one thing. For starters, EX3, while still an early PS2 title, was competing for attention with some massive names. Sharing the birthday with Tekken Tag wasn't easy, Dead or Alive 2 was turning heads, and Bloody Roar 3 would hit that same year. The jump from the original PlayStation to the PS2 made the leap in visuals feel even harsher, and EX3's stiff animations and microwave safe character models didn't exactly scream next gen. Then there was the other big reason, Capcom themselves. Around this time, they were just stuffing the market with fighting games faster than anyone can keep up with. You had Street Fighter Alpha 3, Third Strike, Capcom vs SNK, Marvel vs Capcom 2, Project Justice, and about a dozen re-releases sprinkled in between. Even diehard fans had to pick and choose, and EX3 was that weird 3D cousin that didn't quite fit in anywhere. It was the easiest one to skip. And let's not forget, critics didn't do the game any favors either. Early reviews painted EX3 as some sort of Frankenstein's monster of half-baked ideas and recycled assets, and once that label got stuck, there was no coming back from it. But here's the thing, Street Fighter EX3 isn't really the disaster people make it out to be. Sure, it's got its share of rough edges, some questionable effects, an art style that feels lost between generations, but underneath all that, it's a surprisingly solid, creative fighter. The tag system is generally ahead of its time, and the roster is fun. The mechanics have depth, and the soundtrack, still top tier. If anything, EX3 is one of those games that got caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time, a victim of Capcom's overproduction and the industry growing pains during the jump to 3D. But if you go back to it now and give it a shot and look past the polygon count, you'll find a game that has a ton of ambition and some ideas that wouldn't resume until years later. So yeah, maybe EX3 wasn't the Street Fighter game the world was asking for in the 2000s, but in hindsight, it might have been the most interesting ones they ever made. We'll see you next time on The Runback.
Team Crossbody.
Alright.